This place isn't creepy. I'll stop here.
Hello, I'm Matthew King. I'm a composer and a pianist, and I'm Professor of Composition at Guildhall School of Music and Drama in London. Today, I'm going to talk to you about Psycho. Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho is such a classic film today that it's quite hard to believe that when it was released in 1960, it was absolutely shocking. Audiences had never seen anything so violent, so probing into the depths of the human psyche. People at the time were so horrified, they felt violated. Lots of people fled from the cinemas. My own parents, who'd gone to watch it on their 4th wedding anniversary, having just been to see North by Northwest, Alfred Hitchcock's previous film, released the previous year, and expecting a sort of jolly romp of a film, got this terrifying experience. My father wasn't able to take a shower for months afterwards. So it really had a deep effect on people. At the time, Alfred Hitchcock was widely castigated by critics who were appalled at the turn that had happened in his movie making. He suddenly tipped from being this family-orientated director to being a horror film director. Of course, nowadays, Psycho has such an iconic status, such an absolute status within the canon of cinema. There are probably only 4 or 5 films that have a similar kind of weight in the history of cinema, that it's been endlessly copied by other movie makers, and not only within the thriller or horror genres, but also within comedy. The Simpsons, for example, refer to it rather skillfully.
Listen to your mother, Lisa. I owe everything I have to my mother's watchful eye and swift hand. Oh, there's Mother now, watching me. What's that, Mother? Well, I have a right to be here. It's school business. Mother, that sailor suit doesn't fit anymore.
I think we should go.
It's interesting watching that clip where Principal Skinner is musing on the watchful eye of his mother in Psycho style, to observe that in the way that they edited that episode, they used the original score by Bernard Herrmann underneath it. And that shows you just how significant Herrmann's score is in terms of the power of the movie. I would say at least 50% of the impact of the film comes from the musical score. And so I think the word masterpiece is perfectly applicable to what Bernard Herrmann did when he scored this film. And the extraordinary thing about it is that it's composed for string instruments only. It's a string orchestra. There's no wind, no brass, no percussion. It's just string instruments, violins, violas, cellos, double basses. That's all we've got. And it's the severity of that sound, the intensity of string instruments on their own, which so perfectly complements the black and white cinematography of Hitchcock's film. And it's not only in terms of the instrumentation, it's also the intensity of the writing, the tension of the harmony, and for example, the opening chord of the prelude with the title sequence is this very specific chord spacing, B flat minor, with an added major 7th, which gives it that tension, and then it's not the root of the chord in the bass, but the 5th, so we're on what's called an inversion. The chord is sort of held in space. It doesn't have a root, and yet it kind of stabs at you. There's a very precise rhythm. Herrmann was a big fan of Igor Stravinsky's music, and you can hear that influence. But this new kind of throbbing rhythmic intensity is coming through, both in the main rhythmic motif of the piece, and then later on in these stabbing figures. All highly memorable, aren't they? And you have these extremely dissonant combinations of thirds that are out of sync with each other. One pair of thirds moving chromatically at the top, a second pair underneath, but dissonant with each other. So you get these collisions all the time. Herrmann's harmony has I would imagine, a higher level of dissonance than almost any other score I can think of prior to Psycho.
Now this one really upsets me. We have an out-of-tune player here.
Part of the reason for the severity of the filmmaking was that Hitchcock was financing the making of the film himself, or at least a large part of the financing was coming from Hitchcock himself. As it turns out, he made millions of dollars out of that. But at the time, he had a certain crisis of confidence about the film, and in fact, we probably wouldn't even have the movie today at all were it not for the intervention of the composer Bernard Herrmann. Herrmann actually saved the film by intervening at a moment when Hitchcock himself was expressing grave concerns about its viability as a movie. In fact, he's planning to chop it up and release it as part of his TV show in installments. And it was at that moment that Herrmann requested that over the Christmas break he could go home and score the significant cues for the movie and then edit these together with the picture and show them to Hitchcock after the Christmas break. Hitchcock reluctantly agreed to let him do that, but he insisted that the famous shower scene, which was so heavily edited, much more heavily edited than any other part of the film, they'd taken a lot of time making that scene, almost a week of shooting on that scene. And so he insisted that the whole thing should be unscored, that the shower scene. All we should hear is the stabbing of the knife and the trickling of the shower water. Herrmann went away and completely ignored those instructions and famously scored the shower scene with the string glissandes, high string slides, and these very tense intervals, major sevenths, running down the orchestra. And if you look at the score, you can see a sort of diagonal series of string instruments coming in a kind of diagonal formation. It's quite an extraordinary thing to see, the actual notation. So this marvellous effect of the downward sliding progression of discords running down the string orchestra is, of course, the perfect accompaniment to that scene. And so famously so, that nobody who watches it could imagine it without that sound. And no doubt it's symptomatic of the degree of trust that had grown up between director and composer, that when Herrmann returned from the Christmas break with all the cues scored and Hitchcock saw his visuals accompanied by the extraordinary string orchestra sounds, he was absolutely won over, and even to the extent of admitting that he'd been wrong about the shower scene. That's something Alfred Hitchcock never did, was confess that he'd done something wrong, but he actually said, my mistake. So to some degree, the film score actually saved the movie, because it was at that moment that Hitchcock realised he had a hit on his hands, and the film was released as a movie. And that's really down to the impact of Bernard Herrmann's extraordinary score. I'll be going into more detail on how the music functions in some of the famous scenes in Psycho in upcoming videos, so don't miss out on those.